Stored raises $250 million at $3 billion valuation. Investors are betting on the software that decouples brand inventory systems from any single warehouse operator or logistics contract. This forces Flexport to either build comparable orchestration or lose visibility into customer workflows by mid-2026. Mid-market brands gain leverage in negotiations because they can switch providers without rewriting their WMS integrations. Legacy 3PL earnings will reflect the margin impact first when current contracts come up for renewal. Thea Energy secures $100 million Series B. Magnet production at this scale shortens the path from lab to grid connection by at least 2 years. Commonwealth Fusion now has to decide whether to license similar manufacturing or double down on its own supply chain before the first demonstration plants come online in 2027. Utilities will start including stellarator options in resource planning documents for the next cycle. Component bottlenecks, not physics, were the real constraint. ClearNote Health closes $52 million Series D. Commercial rollout of these tests now collides with existing lab partnerships that Guardant Health already has in place. Guardant must accelerate its own multi-cancer assay launches or watch early-stage screening volume shift before its next payer cycle closes. Payers gain leverage in price talks because 2 validated options create bidding pressure that single provider deals never faced. Hospitals running the same pilots will compare detection rates head-to-head, changing which test gets first-line status in oncology pathways by early next year. Lilly acquires LimmaTech for up to $780 million. The milestone structure tells you Lilly is buying platform access, not just one vaccine candidate. GSK now has to accelerate its own conjugate vaccine partnerships or lose the next round of government tenders that specify updated bacterial coverage. Integration into Lilly's existing biologic manufacturing will compress timelines for other pipeline assets that were waiting on similar tech. The upfront payment size shows how scarce validated platforms have become for large pharma chasing bacterial vaccine gaps left by older technologies. Micron and SK Hynix hit $1 trillion Columbine market cap. Market cap milestones matter less than the margin split between HBM and legacy DRAM that got them there. Samsung must now match the HBM capacity ramp or accept share loss in the data center segment through 2026. Cloud providers gain negotiating power once both new suppliers clear qualification, which typically triggers 15 to 20% price reductions in follow-on deals. The cap reflects demand concentration, not broad recovery across memory segments that older capacity still serves. P2 Science raises $23 million Series D. Investors poured fresh capital into sustainable routes for fragrance ingredients that avoid petroleum. The ratio of this round to prior ones shows how fast the offtake market is maturing. The real pressure lands on legacy producers relying on petrochemical feedstocks. They must either secure bio-licenses within the next year or accept shrinking margins on ESG contracts from consumer brands. Pilot customers already demand dual sourcing. Any hesitation from Dow or BASF hands smaller entrants the regulatory edge before 2026. Toshiba launches high-speed digital isolators. European spec sheets now include a temperature rating that changes socket economics for motor control boards. Factories running continuous processes just gained a drop-in part that holds spec at peak heat without active cooling. Texas Instruments and Analog Devices must now decide whether to match the temperature rating or concede design wins in European motor drives. The spec sheet hides a 30% power saving at full load. One major automation integrator has already shifted its qualification timeline forward 6 months. EU Networks launches Quantum Shield service. Finance desks just received a quantum-safe option that bypasses the usual software overlay delays. The service encrypts fiber at the optical layer before quantum computers arrive, yet every bank and exchange running dark fiber now faces a refresh cycle they didn't budget. AdTrans Box adds microseconds that market makers notice immediately. Competitors offering standard encryption must either license the same transport or watch their highest margin routes migrate. 2 London peering points have already scheduled trials for Q4. SKRA launches Tech Catalyst Fund. State-level grants rarely target the exact reimbursement friction that kills rural pilots. South Carolina clinics now have seed money aimed at connectivity gaps that federal programs overlook. Larger hospital groups must either open their own rural innovation arms or risk losing referral volume when these startups clear FDA and payer hurdles. The first cohort focuses on home monitoring for chronic conditions. Success here pulls forward Medicare Advantage expansion timelines by a full year in similar states. PensiVision sends imaging tech to ISS. Zero-G reveals vibration effects that ground tests miss entirely for stereo imaging systems. Sending the payload up tests calibration stability under launch loads that no terrestrial vibration table fully replicates. Device makers working on surgical robots now treat the resulting dataset as the reference they must beat. Any Earthbound system cleared after this flight carries an implicit comparison the FDA reviewers haven't applied before. One imaging OEM has already requested early access to the raw telemetry. LimmaTech acquires Indicor for $5 billion. The $5 billion price tag already signals how scarce clean instrumentation assets have become. Rockwell and Emerson both lose a potential partner for joint bids on the next wave of U.S. semiconductor plants. That forces them to court smaller European controls firms before the end of next year, simply to stay on bid lists. Watch the next 3 RFPs from TSMC suppliers. The winner will likely carry a fresh distribution agreement no one had on the books 6 months ago. MasterCard buys BVNK for up to $1.8 billion. MasterCard just locked in payout corridors that most fintechs still access through 3 different processes. BVNK's reach into high-growth markets now sits behind MasterCard's settlement layer. Stripe faces a direct choice: build matching pipes within 18 months or accept lower win rates on cross-border treasury RFPs. The gap appears immediately in pricing and speed for any neobank. The next 3 enterprise deals that cross 2 continents will likely favor the combined stack over any multi-processor route. Bullish acquires Equiniti for $4.2 billion. Equiniti's registrar contracts now sit inside an exchange that can bundle clearing and settlement. Broadridge loses its clean shot at those renewals when they come up for bid. Expect the next 2 UK corporate actions RFPs to carry bundled pricing that standalone providers cannot match without a partner. Any US issuer running a tender offer next year will see the new option on the table before their current contract expires. Pricing pressure follows on the next renewal cycle. Father raises $150 million Series D. RIAs running their own tech stacks just lost another quarter of differentiation. Father can now subsidize client acquisition long enough to pull assets from every regional practice still using separate custodians and planning tools. Expect 2 mid-sized RIA roll-ups to sign distribution deals with the platform before the Series E term sheet circulates. The advisors who stay independent will face higher effective fees once their best clients see the lower all-in cost on the Father dashboard. NSF launches Tech Accelerators program. University labs now have a faster path to matched government capital than most seed funds can offer. Private accelerators lose first look at the teams that used to need their intros to reach DoD or NIH program officers. The next hardware spinout from Stanford or MIT will likely run its first pilot under the NSF banner before any VC term sheet arrives. Watch which seed funds quietly add an NSF liaison to their sourcing process inside the next 2 quarters. Louisiana gets $1 billion for rural health tech. State procurement cycles drag 18 months minimum even after the announcement, so this capital sits idle while vendors scramble for RFPs. GE Healthcare and similar incumbents gain time to bundle training with hardware leases, crowding out startups that lack field service networks. Smaller players must partner locally or lose the window entirely. Hospitals hit year 2 renewal with locked-in data platforms that make switching costs prohibitive and margins on consumables jump 30%. Skechers debuts Razor 2 football boot. Football cleat margins have compressed 15% industry-wide over 2 years as direct-to-consumer brands undercut traditional pricing. Skechers' move lands right in that gap with a lower-cost alternative that still carries pro-level endorsements. Expect early retail data to show if volume compensates for thinner per-unit returns. Nike now has to decide whether to defend the segment with its own budget line or cede the lower tiers and focus on premium only. Honda plant marks 20 years production. 20 years of steady output masks the coming retooling pressure as Honda's own EV timeline collides with existing contracts for the Odyssey and Pilot lines. Suppliers locked into 10-speed components face volume cliffs by 2026 unless they win allocations on the next platform. The first sign will appear in Q3 inventory reports from transmission rebuilders. Toyota's Georgetown plant watches closely. Any capacity freed here could flood the used parts market and erode their remanufacturing margins. Kin Health closes $9 million seed round. Most seed rounds in digital health still chase engagement metrics that payers ignore. Kin's backers appear focused instead on adherence data that can slot directly into value-based care contracts. Early hospital pilots already show readmission drops that matter more than daily active users. Watch the first enterprise RFP responses due in Q4 to see who adapts faster. This forces Medisafe to either publish its own claims datasets or lose pilot deals to a better documented rival by next summer. MidOcean Energy gets $120 million investment. The equity check matters less than the offtake agreement that likely travels with it. Arab energy fund portfolios have historically required minimum volume commitments that lock developers into specific export routes for at least 5 years. European buyers now face tighter supply options as those routes prioritize Middle East partners over spot cargoes through 2027. Expect contract renegotiations at 2 or 3 terminals by the end of next year as smaller operators struggle to match terms.